Welcome to God with George Ortega. This is episode number 55, I believe. Let me just check for a minute. Yes, and I'm recording it on Thursday, January 7th at 6:29 p.m. Eastern Time. And, this episode is being recorded a day after the violent um, insurrection, act of treason, um, assault on the Capitol. And ordinarily, it's my tendency to to respond politically and in terms of what we as a people, our leaders, need to do to redress what happened, to protect ourselves, protect our country. Um, but but what this but a lot of what this series is about is um, is not relying on ourselves. I mean, yes, there's the adage that God helps those who help themselves, and certainly we uh, we must do what we can to um, to correct our institutions, to create laws that prevent another Trump from ever rising to power. That's a given, and when we have to punish Trump as a deterrent, uh, and so yeah, that's how we're designed. We're designed to seek pleasure, avoid pain. So basically, you know, the way, at least at this point in our evolution as a society, as a country, as a world, that we encourage moral behavior, especially in our leaders, is through not just rewards but punishments. But I don't want to. I want to move away from that somewhat pragmatic approach of what needs to happen, again, to protect us, to protect the future of not just this country, but I think the world, because this country is a leader in so many ways. When we fall prey to tyrants, that makes it more likely that other countries will. But again, this is hard for me to a, a lot of the purpose of this show is to acknowledge to ourselves that yes, there are things we can do to improve our lives, to improve our world, to repair our world, both individually and globally. Um, but we have to acknowledge the fundamental nature of reality in that this is God's world and it's God's will. What happened was God's will. And and it may be that the answer to it never happening again has more to do with beseeching God, praying to God to protect us than through whatever efforts we may make politically or you know um, in terms of justice. So and this is I think sometimes we don't sufficiently understand our need to call upon God in times like this because we have this mistaken notion that, well, God isn't really all powerful. God really isn't sovereign because God gave us this ability, this free will to do as we choose. So naturally, from that perspective, it doesn't seem like God plays much of a role in what we can do to protect ourselves. Um, Nonetheless, people who believe in free will, that what we do is up to us nonetheless pray to God, which is, I don't think they understand the contradiction there, you know. But for those of us who do, who understand that God's will is the only will, it's important to keep that in mind during times like this, so that we are beseeching God, asking, why is this happening to us? And again, in the final analysis, when we ask that question, the answer to this may be, well, this is happening to us because we're neglecting the poor. We're neglecting the welfare of farm animals. We're neglecting the future in terms of, just not fighting climate change. There are various individual and collective sins that we can refer to as possible reasons, causes for this that has happened. But again, most fundamentally, that's not an explanation. That's not a complete explanation, because God being sovereign, whatever we're failing to do, not doing enough of, whatever we're doing that's just wrong, that's immoral, is really God's doing. And to many people, that that is a very, very uncomfortable truth. But what's its alternative? And this is so important right now. The alternative to understanding that God is sovereign, that God is all powerful, and what God wills to happen happens. What happens is God's will, is that we navigate circumstances, crises like this, blaming each other and blaming ourselves, mostly blaming each other. Those protesters were angry, and they took it out on our government. They weren't angry with God, because like 99% of people here in the United States and throughout the world, I'm not sure about, and I've heard that some countries, actually, people don't believe in free will that much. But here in the United States, almost everybody believes in free will. And from that mindset, the protesters, Trump, the politicians, if people are working under the understanding, the belief, the mistaken belief that what we do is up to us, then yes, then we're engaged in an endless battle with each other, because that's what the free will belief creates and sustains. And the alternative to that is to understand, well, this is all God's doing. And so, yes, we still need to have our laws and our rules. And, Trump cannot be allowed to get away with this. The Republican Party cannot be allowed to get away with their complicity in this. We have to protect our country, our world. And yes, we have, again, these political means, these ways that we help ourselves. But when we consider this, the differences of ideology and the various differences we have as people, when we consider it within the context that we're not credit worthy for our virtues, like compassion and fairness, and others are not blameworthy for their sins, like violence and murder and extreme selfishness and callousness. This mindset locks us into a future where we're just waiting for the next war, the next skirmish, the next, you know, the next thing that just separates us, that keeps us apart or pulls us apart. And, you know, we're moving into an era where this next thing for decades will be climate change because we've been so negligent in addressing it. Again, I have to remind myself, you know, I said that I felt, I sensed a kind of like an accusatory tone, you know, like this was our fault. But no, even those of us who understand that God's will is the only will, you know, we're so conditioned by this. It's kind of like believing that the earth is really flat, you know. I mean, it looks flat, you know, like, you know, we don't question it in a certain sense. It's like pragmatically flat, whatever. But this is different, you know. This, you know, knowing that the world is round doesn't really affect our everyday life at all. you know, if we want to fly to the moon and come back, you know, then yes, I think it's good to understand the physics of our round orb of a planet and all that. But in cases like this, yeah, this refusal to acknowledge what's so obvious, you know, that God is the only will. And the reason it's so obvious because, like, you know, just challenge yourself. You know, do you really have a free will? What does a free will mean to you? You know, doesn't it mean that you can do and think and say and feel what you want? But can you? You know, because like what our challenge as human beings, our fundamental challenge is to be as happy as possible. Ideally, to be completely happy all the time, and to also be very virtuous. So you just have to just look at our level of happiness individually in society, which isn't all that bad. It's about 70%, but it's, you know, that's far from 100%. And our level of immorality, you know, factory farms, you know, eating animals who endure Holocaust lives, you know, 80 billion of them each year. No, we don't have, unless you want to kind of like condemn us that like, yes, we have a free will and we're freely willing to do this evil. So yes, we acknowledge that we're that evil. So, but I don't think that's a wise kind of acknowledgement because like to the extent that we identify ourselves like that, then that self-identity compels or motivates behavior that's in accordance with that self-concept. So, all right. So again, let's try to return this more to God directly. We need to appeal to God more. Uh, Again, maybe starting by understanding that God's will is the only will. The reason we appeal to God is because God is pulling all the strings, because God has the power to change things. And, you know, I suppose if we want to try to glean God's meaning in this, why God does this, you know, we might say that, well, what happens with us, it's happened with me personally, it happens with many people. I think there's this saying that there are no atheists in a foxhole. The idea that like when we are threatened, when we are fearful, when we are hurting, we turn to God. We turn to God. And too often when things are going well, we forget about God. And this is incidentally one reason I'm doing this series, because I like most of us, you know, I don't think have God in our consciousness nearly enough. So this is one approach that I'm trying to awaken that God consciousness, to sustain it throughout my days. But for you watching, and for me as well, I just think God probably had this happen to awaken us from our complacency, to to draw us nearer to God. You know, a lot of people are praying a lot more today than they were the day before yesterday. A lot of people are therefore much closer to God today than they were the day before yesterday. So, you know, it's not an ideal situation, of course. I mean, like, it would be great if you know, our all-powerful God would just compel us through that power to not get ourselves in messes like this, or more directly, more accurately, um, it would be great if God wouldn't compel us to do these things. Both Trump and you know, um, just briefly getting a little political, because this has been on my mind. It's not just, you know, we not only have to address this threat that Trump and his conspirators, co-conspirators represent, you know, both in government and out of government, but we also have to address the wider population of his followers who obviously are not satisfied with things. And to the extent that, you know, a lot of this is economic. A lot of, I imagine that the majority of Trump supporters, or at least the ones that go out into the streets and you know, incite insurrection, or just like, not just manifest insurrection, that they're probably not all that well off. Um, so I say this, to kind of also give us an understanding of what we need to pray for. You know, yes, we need to pray for and this is perhaps, you know, one of the reasons we pray. You know, for our prayers perhaps to be effective, they have to be intelligent, and they have to be focused on what we need. And for example, I don't think our leaders, I don't think our media, I don't think I don't think I really sufficiently understand the mind of these Trump supporters. You know, yeah, we can talk in ballpark senses that they, you know, like in Wisconsin and Michigan, that many are, you know, economically troubled. But that's, you know, there's more to it, I'm sure. Um, yeah, like one of the things that we all go through is like, you know, and we do so much better with this in the North than they do in the South and perhaps Midwest. But like, you know, we are a combination of, I guess, four. I'll try to get back to God soon. We're a combination of four cultures. We're like white, black, Asian, and Hispanic. You know, and as our world gets better, and it really is getting a lot better because of this blending of ethnicities and races, because of this, you know, melting pot, this global melting pot that is so evident here in the United States. um, we are getting, you know, we are both biologically and sociologically, we're becoming more whole, you know, less divided, more unified. But it's a difficult transition, you know, because Hispanic culture, for example, is different than Anglo-Saxon culture, which is different than Black culture, which is different than Asian culture. So we have this problem of assimilation, and I think that's what a lot of Trump's supporters are responding to, even though they don't realize it. You know, our leaders, our media. I mean, now the media does a lot, I think, to make things better. I mean, we have, you know, a lot of portrayals. There's a lot of, for example, in the 50s, everybody on TV was white. So now, like, you know, we've got like Black and Asian and Hispanic people on TV all the time. So we are making progress, but it seems that more is necessary, and I think that our government needs to create new instruments, new vehicles for allowing us to regain the kind of cohesiveness in our society, kind of familiarity with each other, that we had, let's say in the 50s and the 40s and before, where people would greet each other. And this, it's not just the races and ethnicities, it's the urbanization. There's problems that, people feel alienated because there's reason so again, pulling this back to God. So let's, I think it's important to be specific in our prayers. I mean, before I eat anything, I my prayer is like, dear God, thank you for this food. Let it be your will that very soon everyone will be very well fed, very healthy, very happy, and very good always. Okay, and I pray that prayer because it covers everything, you know, health, happiness, virtue. What else is there? But, fine, that may be right. Okay for a blessing before a meal, but it may be that the kind of prayers that God wants to hear from us are much more considered, are much more specific. To pray for a lessening of this alienation, to pray for a lessening of this divisiveness, of this, at least here in the United States, society we've created, where many of us are living in fear or overworked, are, again, alone. More people are living on their own now than ever before. Used to be like people several decades ago, 3, 4 decades ago, had maybe 3, 4 friends that were really close friends. Now we're lucky if we have one really close friend, despite the internet and cell phones and all that. So I think, I think it's important for us to pray to God with specifics, with specificity. Pray to God that our leaders create new laws that don't allow candidates to insult other candidates like Trump did to get elected. Create laws that don't allow our candidates to bring out the worst in people as a means of getting elected, to the lowest common denominator, appealing to our most base instincts, demeaning us for, in Trump's case, personal aggrandizement. I mean, the man is certainly deranged, deluded, not that bright at all, and you've got to absolve them because he doesn't have a free will. I mean, this is how God made him. But we have to understand. We have to understand that people like Trump should never, ever again, and at least in this country, well, in any country really, rise to power. And the way we keep people like that, for again, like there should be a civility law that while we as citizens, we don't hold public office, it's not perhaps against the law for us to insult one another, even though it's not wise or virtuous. For politicians, I think we need to hold them to a higher standard. And so that's a good prayer. I mean, like, to hold our politicians, God, please compel these leaders to summon up their conscience, to stop thinking about themselves. Too many of these politicians are really concerned with their election. They're many of them are not all that concerned with the Republican Party is much more concerned with the Republican Party than it is with either the United States or the world. That's a major threat. But and it's like pulling again this back to God. We have to continue to ask, and if we have to ask this, a million times, then so be it. We part of this prayer is not just to ask God to help us overcome this, to become better people, to create a better country, a better world. But I think I think it's wise to ask God, why are you doing this? And apart from, you're doing this because we deserve it, because we've been, torturing animals and ignoring the poor. the poor in Africa, about 1 billion people who are really poor. Yes, that explains it, but you know, on a deeper level, we need to ask God, well, why are you making us abuse these animals? Why are you making us remain so indifferent to the plight of the extreme poor? Why are you making us both cause this climate change and avoid fixing it for future generations? In terms of an answer to that question, yeah, I mean, who can know the mind of God? Is the most fundamental answer. But nonetheless, I think for our benefit, even if we never get an answer, um, it's good to ask the question. So why does God do this? And that's kind of like a prayer in itself. God, why are you doing this to us? Please stop. Please, you designed us as human beings who seek pleasure and avoid pain. That's who we are biologically. And yes, we're fortunate, we're blessed that we're 70% happy, that this world has become so wonderful in so many ways for so many of us. But there's more to do. There's more to do. We're not where we should be. Our world isn't where we should be. So why are you doing this to us? And please stop. Please change your ways. And with God, sometimes when we do this with, for example, with Trump and the protesters, there's indictment. They're clearly wrong. They're clearly evil in this case. To overthrow a country as great as this by violent means, that's evil. But fortunately for ourselves, we can't judge God. So when we ask God, why are you doing this, without judgment? All right, got about a minute left. So, all right, watch this series every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock on White Plains Community Media, channel 76 if you get Optimum, 45 if you get Verizon, or check out the episodes on YouTube. I'm a little behind. I got to get the last 5 or 10 up there. But and actually, there's a friend of mine who happens to be a rabbi, may be joining me as a guest. He and I were talking about this recently, and we may revive this series. We did episodes 3 through 7 as a way of explaining to the world that God isn't just a belief, God is a provable reality. And my friend and I hopefully will do something like that again. Thanks for watching. Running out of time. See you again soon.